Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of Confabulating. We're delighted to be joined this evening by Dr. Eneko of the University of the Basque Country, who will be delivering a talk entitled Painting Heaven and Hell in the Wake of Plague, the Success of the Craft of Painting during the second half of the 14th century in the Kingdom of Navarre. Eneko is an early career scholar in the University of the Basque Country, where he teaches in the art history department as an assistant professor. He's also a researcher on the project Alaba Medieval, Erde Arroyo Araba, studying the monastery at the Palace of Quejana in Alaba. He completed his Ph.D. in a cotutel program in April 2023 between the University of Navarre and the University of the Basque Country. He's also a graduate in art history and artistic photography and holds two master's degrees, one in museum studies and another in historical research methods. In addition to that, he's gained professional experience in the museum sector, curating in 2018 the exhibition Calismo desde el Cine for the Museo de Calismo in Estella Lizarra, after working in different museums in the Basque Country and United States. Eneko has published a variety of works from 2017 to 2024 on topics such as pigments, binders, and painting techniques used in the craft of mural painting in the 12th to 14th century Kingdom of Navarre, Napoleonic aesthetic influences in the popular culture of the Basque Country, female artistic patronage in rural Navarrese parish churches after 1348, and Carlism for the cinema. In 2022, he was awarded a dissertation grant by the Medieval Academy of America, and in 2021, he received the University of the Basque Country Joint Ph.D. Scholarship, the Echeverria Scholarship, and the Osman Institute Award. He was also awarded the Graduate Student Association Material and Research Grant Award in 2020. He's currently expanding his research towards the broader landscape of painting in the period after the Black Death, and his talk today will deal with the art of mural painting done inside parish churches in the rural area of Navarre during the second half of the 14th century, from an interdisciplinary perspective, including detailed local historical context, study of patronage of local elites, and craft by painters, examination of materials used in murals, and iconographic programs. Eneko, thanks so much for joining us. It's great to have you with us today.
Thank you so much, Peter, for the presentation and, of course, for inviting me to your channel and to this channel. It's a magnificent opportunity for me.
No worries, it's a pleasure.
So, should I start or?
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay. So, yeah, we'll be presenting, as Peter said, about my dissertation topic. But I would like to start this time. Usually I start directly diving into the Middle Ages, but this time, well, in the last months, I changed my starting part of the presentation, and I will start from the 20th century, from the early and middle part of the 20th century in Spain, where it's important to know how the wall paintings, especially the medieval wall paintings all over Spain were treated in the early and central decades of the 20th century to understand the scenario that we get into the 21st century. And well, if you are ready, Peter, I will share the presentation.
Yeah, go for it.
Perfect. So, as Peter said, I did my PhD in a cotutel program between the University of the Basque Country and the University of Nevada in Reno. So, as I said, it's important, and I think it's quite different, the history of wall paintings, medieval wall paintings in Spain from the rest of Europe, because in 1919 and 1920 started the fashion of detaching medieval wall paintings and, in the first place, selling into the art market. And that also moved different institutions of Spain that get used to detach these different wall paintings and moving them to museums. Of course, these wall paintings, as you can see, they're Christian Catholic. They represent Christian Catholic images and they were originally painted inside churches. So after 1920, started this tradition of detaching the wall paintings and moving it to, as I said, into that market, and finally ended in different museums around the world. The technique to detach these wall paintings, it's called strappo, and it's a Italian term to describe the removal of a mural painting by placing a canvas with special kind of glue and then detaching the wall painting and transferring into another canvas. It's a very complicated technique and extremely delicate, and if it's not done properly, it can destroy the original wall painting. So these are different images of how a strappo is done, but basically to summarize, it's this technique of gluing literally a canvas into the wall painting and then detach the image. And only the pigments and the exterior surface of the wall paintings is detached. And then it needs to get placed in another canvas because the first detaching it's reversed. It's not a correct image in the correct direction. Well, these are different techniques of detaching wall paintings. I'm not getting into that, but in Spain it's just the idea of detaching the surface of the wall paintings. This is a historical picture of Catalan Romanesque wall paintings being detached in the Catalan Pyrenees, and you can see here how finally the wall paintings are transformed into this canvas that it can be even rolled to be transported somewhere else. In the 1920s, many of these wall paintings, Catalan wall paintings, they were detached from the Catalan Pyrenees, and they were moved to a museum in Barcelona that will eventually transform into the Museo Nacional de Arte de Catalunya, the MENAC. Nowadays, the MENAC is hosts the biggest collection in the world of Romanesque wall paintings. But also in other parts of Spain, besides Catalonia, there were done some detachings, as the detachments of San Baudelio de Berlanga in Soria that ended in the cloisters, in the Metropolitan Museum of New York, and San Pedro Arlanza, also in Castile, in Burgos, very close to Soria, that also ended up in this museum. And this was in the 1920s. In the 1930s, as you know, the Spanish Civil War in 1936 broke in Spain, and it was, as you know, the prelude of the Second World War in Europe. This will be important later to explain in a few slides why there was a certain approach to wall paintings, okay? In this civil war, more detachment happened, especially those of the monastery, the Aragonese monastery of Sigena, located just in the border between Aragon and Catalonia. Sadly, a battalion of anarchist militias, they burned down the monastery, and as a result, it was heavily damaged, and the amazing 13th century wall paintings in a Romanesque style, they were extremely damaged. And then two art historians, and well, two brothers, one is Josep Guidiol and the other Ramon Guidiol, that they knew this technique of strappo. They detach the wall paintings with of course a team of workers. They detach the wall paintings from Sigena from this monastery of Sigena, and they move it, all the wall paintings, roll it in these canvases to Barcelona. Years later, they will be hosted and displayed, that are still displayed in this MNAC, in this National Museum of Catalonia. Of course, they are decontextualized and moved from their original setting, and thus that causes a lot of problems. But I'm not focusing neither in Catalonia, neither Castile, neither in Aragon. I'm focusing on the Kingdom of Navarre. This was originally a kingdom formed from the Basque tribes in the 9th century, 8th, 9th century. From the original Kingdom of Pamplona, it formed this Kingdom of Pamplona first, and then in the 12th century, it evolved into the Kingdom of Navarre, that included also areas of the south of that will be Navarre, but that were originally of Muslim control. So Navarre was a very diverse kingdom. There was not just one ethnic group. And especially after 1235, French dynasties arise to the throne of Navarre. And well, there were different dynasties, but between in the beginning of the 14th century, the Capetian kings that they were ruling in France, they will rule also in Navarre. And after 1328, a branch of this Capetian family, the Ebre, secured the throne until 1441. So you can imagine that the French influence and the Northern European influence was great in this Iberian kingdom. And also, it's important to say that it's located in the north side of the Iberian Peninsula, and actually part of the territory is part of the nowadays France. So in Navarre, there were many wall paintings from the Middle Ages, and after the Spanish Civil War, when the Franco loyalists and the nationalists that they have been called, they won the war, and they instaured this national Catholic regime, a special approach was taken to all the religious and medieval art in Navarre. And for the wall paintings, it raised the idea of creating a museum as the MNAC, as the Museum of the National Art of Catalonia, but instead of displaying the biggest collection of Romanesque wall paintings, this Navarrese museum will display the biggest collection of Gothic wall paintings. And this also it was at the same time that approach to a restoration approach to different parish churches and cathedrals of Navarre was taken. And this approach was the petrophilia. So here the two ideas of the touching wall paintings, the strapo, and the petrophilia get together. So what's the petrophilia? Petrophilia, or love of the stone, it's, well, a term coined in the end of the 20th century, but it's actually an approach to architecture created in the 19th century by scholars as John Ruskin, where the architecture of the past, the monuments, they should be colorless, okay? So they should be of the color of the natural stone. And architecture should be over minor arts as painting. So it's this erroneous thinking, this wrong thinking, that the painting in that the architecture in the Middle Ages was completely colorless. So this created a trend, especially between architects and art historians of this 20th century, especially this 1940s, 1950s in Navarre, where they started basically destroying all the layers of whitewash, and under the whitewash there were wall paintings, many times medieval wall paintings. So many of these medieval wall paintings, we don't know how many, but were destroyed for sure in these petrophilia campaigns that they were started in the 1940s. So you can see in this photo very well, where the stone, the fabric of the church has been taken out, but originally it was painted. All the church was painted, and this section of the medieval wall paintings, this case 14th century wall paintings, they survived because there was a Baroque altarpiece in front covering the wall paintings. So that's the reason that we preserve this section of the wall paintings. Otherwise, the rest of the church was completely clear out, and this love for the stone, this petrophilia, came out, no, destroying all these layers of whitewash, and then under the whitewash, paintings. So, of course, they knew, many of these art historians who were directing this, and scholars who were directing these campaigns of petrophilia, they knew that there were wall paintings, no, in different churches. So that's why they started this detaching campaign of detaching all the known wall paintings in Navarre and creating a museum with these wall paintings. For example, in the church of San Salvador de Gallipienzo, here in the apse, you can see very well how the blank sections of the apse, the paintings, they have been removed, but there are still paintings in the upper sections of the apse that were so damaged by the time that they were detached that the restorers, well, the technicians that were doing these detachings, they decide to abandon the paintings just over there in the church. So the original idea was to save these paintings from destruction, but when moving them to the museum, when detaching it to a canvas from the mural painting format to a canvas format, and when framing them into modern painting frame paintings, they decontextualize the paintings completely. So this Museum of Navarre, with these wall paintings and many other collections, fantastic collections, it was opened in 1956, and you can read over here how it was thought as the biggest collection of Gothic wall paintings compared with the National Museum of Catalonia. And here you can see these different examples of wall paintings framed in canvases and framed, no, and presented as modern paintings, even if originally they were wall paintings, mural paintings. Even the technicians that were Ramon Guidiol, the one that I mentioned before, he was so skilled that he was able to detach 2 layers of the wall paintings from one wall painting, from one mural painting. His skill was so great with this strapo technique that he was able to detach 2 layers. One layer was completely restored and presented in the museum, and the other layer was sold into the art market of Barcelona. And you can see the differences as in the eyes over here between the original wall painting, well, and the one completely restored. So this petrophilia and strapo, they are 2 sides of the same coin, and I think they're very necessary to explain the mural wall painting scenario that we have in the early 21st century in Navarre. So what's left? No, besides these campaigns of petrophilia, of destroying wall paintings and detaching wall paintings, we have a huge number of wall paintings, especially in the center of Navarre. Not in the north, not in the south, but almost all of them, they're focused in the center of Navarre, no? And these ones in this map, they are only those from the 14th century. And it's the century that I'm going to focus. So here are numbers of my research, some data. As you can see, most of the wall paintings, of the surviving wall paintings, are from the 14th century. And from this 14th century, we can more or less guess from which different decades are, even if many of these datations, this data, it's from stylistic different datations, different dates. So it's not very trustable, but nevertheless, we can more or less know that about 10 paintings were done, 10 or 20 wall paintings of the surviving wall paintings were done in the central decades of the century. And there is a big number of wall paintings, about 12, that cannot be dated with precision. So I'm going to focus in this second half of the 14th century. In that second half of the 14th century, you can see the Kingdom of Navarre and its neighbors by 1360. And you can see the Kingdom of Navarre over here in the very center, surrounded by the crown, the big crowns of Castile, Aragon, and the crown of England, where it controlled all the area of Aquitaine and south of France, the crown of France over here, and also the kings of Navarre. In that time, there were counts of Evreux, of the area in the area of Normandy, and also controlled Cherbourg. So you can see that there were important players. Actually, the King of Navarre, Charles II, that I will get into him right now. He was a very important player in the 100-Year War, in the early 100-Year War. And actually, he was one of the pretenders for the throne of France. So Charles II of the royal family, part of the French royal family, he rise to the kingdom, to the throne of Navarre in 1349, after her mother, the Queen of Navarre, died of Black Plague. So here gets the important data that we have in Navarre, thanks to different taxation documents that they're kept in the historical Navarrese archives, in the Royal Navarrese Archive. Thanks to this taxation data, we have a very precise, the historians, they calculated a very precise decrease of population when the famine in 1347 and the first Black Death in 1348 arrived to Navarre. The local Navarrese, they call it La Gran Mortandad, and the numbers are just terrifying, are really apocalyptic, no? If in 3030 about Navarre had 250,000 inhabitants, by 1350 43% of the households disappeared. So every 10 years, and this is also important to note, every 10 years a new wave of Black Death appeared in Navarre and the rest of Europe. But in Navarre, we can, again, with these taxation documents, we can calculate the population. No? So in the second wave in 1362, 20% of the households disappeared. So by 1366, about 100,000 Navarrese were alive. And again, every 10 years, there was a new wave of Black Plague. At the same time, this king of Navarre, Charles II, he get into different, he was involved in different wars, all in this scenario of the 100-Year Wars that involved not only France and England, but also Castile and the Iberian Peninsula. So we can see here that he went to war against France, then against Aragon. There were small wars and very focalized and localized, but anyway, this created a continuous scenario of wars in the Kingdom of Navarre. And besides the wars, also there was an economic crisis created by the devaluation of the Navarrese coin of the moment. So this scenario that it's drawn by social historians, it's really apocalyptic. But if we compare it, here comes the clash between between social historians and art historians. If we compare it with the art of painting, surprisingly, this was a period where the art of painting flourished in the Kingdom of Navarre. So especially there was a big start of the art of painting in the 1330s around the Cathedral of Pamplona, but all the data points that all these painters that continued painting even in the chaotic scenario of the Black Plague and the continuous war and the economic crisis. So here we can see all the wall paintings that they have been dated into this 14th century, which is a great number if we compare it, for example, with other regions of Spain and Iberia, like Castile and Valencia. It's a big number of 14th century wall paintings. So here it's important to say that the cathedral was painted in this period, in this 14th century, but also humble parish churches that were painted all over the rural area of Navarre. And also started appearing a great number of, a big number of wood panels, painted wood panels. So we have different styles. We have from very fashionable and top period wall paintings with a great quality, but at the same time, we have a very still Romanesque and rural and naive paintings in different rural churches. And also we have examples on the middle, no? That they were not very, they are not examples of a fantastic craft like this one in Olite, but anyway, they are very interesting. So in this context, the question is, who was paying for these wall paintings, no? And one question, and the most obvious, it seems that they were the local nobility, the local Navarrese nobility, who paid for these painters, local painters from Pamplona, from the kingdom, from the capital of the kingdom, Pamplona, who were paying for these different wall paintings. And actually, we still have heraldic emblems, as you can see in these different pictures, of these noble families, and not noble individuals, but noble families who like it to portray their family emblem inside these parish churches. So here it's interesting to ask about the function of these heraldic emblems and the function also for the patronage of these wall paintings. So there are two distinctive aspects that besides of this patronage and creation in a period of crisis to distinguish the wall paintings in Navarre. First is these local active painters from Pamplona, from the capital. And the second is access to rich pigments to decorate the churches with a different scheme of the colors from the rest of Europe. And this may explain why there are so many paintings in this 14th century Navarre. So in my PhD, I was able to gather all the data of different restoration reports done in the last 20 years and create these graphics where we can see very well the evolution of use of different pigments in the different centuries in Navarre. This will be mural paintings from the 13th century. This will be from the 14th century, but those wall paintings focused into the cathedral and in the very top churches of the kingdom. And this will be those wall paintings done in rural parish churches. Here it's very in the middle, it's very significant the explosion of blue color. No? Suddenly, from the 13th century, we have explosion of blue color, and especially of the pigment called azurite, which is a copper-based pigment and also related to the malachite pigment, okay, which is also the copper, another copper based mineral pigment, which both of them are completely related. It's also important to note that besides the material use of blue color, the symbolic implications of blue color in this 14th century, as blue was transformed into the 12th, 13th century into the color of the Virgin. The mantle, the cloak of the Virgin was blue after the 12th century, and also the color of the kings of France, of the coat of arms of the kings of France. So my question on why there was so much blue color into these mural paintings, into these Navarrese wall mural paintings, it was thankfully answered by a document of this Navarrese medieval archives where, well, the royal court, the administration of Navarre, they sent a painter, and not a miner, but a painter to a mine in the Pyrenees called Urrobi, looking for azurite azurite, silver, and copper. And when I visited the mine, I was able to find still azurite examples from this mine that was exploited in the Middle Ages, especially in the 14th century, in some very specific years of the 14th century. This access to azurite will explain why there are parish churches, as we will see right now, in Navarre with great quantities of blue color. And it's important to note that blue was a very expensive pigment. For example, in different documentation that we have about the cost of pigments in Navarre for the Navarrese royal court, the azurite is the second most expensive pigment, azurite blue, and the first most expensive pigment with difference is lapis lazuli that came from Afghanistan, also the most expensive blue pigment in Europe in that time, in all the Middle Ages actually. So what was the common thing in the rest of European, Castilian, and even Navarrese churches to paint the backgrounds of the churches with this white line, and then over the white line to use cheap but very useful pigments of red iron oxide, black coal, black bone, and other yellow earth pigments. No? So it was this very colorful use of different pigments, and red and white, but still very cheap. And it was easy to cover a whole church with these colors. However, blue was another story. So I also studied different iconographic programs in my dissertation created by wall paintings. But now I'm just going to focus in the third example. This third example divided parish churches between heaven and hell, and that's where the title of my dissertation and this presentation came, where wall paintings served to divide the parish church into different sections, as it's common in all Christendom. But in this case, a special approach was done with locating a geographical and saint scenes with blue background in the north wall and hell scenes with red backgrounds in the south wall. And in the case that we are going to see right now in the Church of San Juan Bautista Eristain, the funerary pantheons of the local nobles were located by the north wall. Well, I did 4 specific studies, and today we are just focusing on this Eristain parish church. This is a reconstruction of the wall paintings of San Salvador de Gallipienzo that I mentioned earlier, where the paintings were detached in the 1940s, the white sections. So basically I placed the paintings in the museum into the original sections, and this is how it will look like more or less originally, no? The apse completely painted with different scenes of the life of Christ, where here they will be displayed the infancy, the childhood of Christ, here the passion and the death and resurrection of Christ, and finally God Almighty in the Pantocrator with different apostles, where you can see that these paintings in the ceiling, they are very lost. Well, just a few words about methodology. I studied these churches by gathering all the possible information, all the possible data from different fields of study. From restoration reports, also identifying the heraldic emblems through medieval archives. As you can see over here, for example, going to the censuses of 1366, where we can read the population that lived in the area of this church. Restoration reports that how these wall paintings were created and what materials they were used. And of course, the traditional art historical approach, reading iconography and style. Well, getting into this specific church, is located in the south rural area of Pamplona, the capital of Navarre again. So basically the church is part of a state where there is a kind of a private palace, small palace, and the church just nearby. It's a really old church. It's even pre-Romanesque, and even Roman stones, they have been found in this church. So it was used at least since the Roman Empire times. The important thing in this church is that an archaeological research discovered that the burials located by the altar and the apse, they were used at the end of the Middle Ages, just in this period of the 14th century. They were decorated with this heraldic emblem that we can find in other places, and we can identify the family, the Solchagas, that they have the same name as the place, as you can see in this document from 1366. So the first listed name in this census of 1366 is Don Martín Pérez, which was the consular of the King Charles II. So we can see here more examples of these heraldic emblems. And these are the location of the paintings that only survive, sadly, in the chancel and the apse. Okay, the paintings inside the nave walls, they were destroyed in the 1980s in this campaign of petrophilia, in one of these campaigns of petrophilia. So we only have the chancel and the apse, but they're pretty comprehensive, and even if they're in a very bad shape of state of the paintings that we will see, they are still reflect a very interesting narrative. So I'm gonna start from very briefly. I'm gonna describe the paintings, and I'm gonna start from the apse, from the very apsidial conch. So here we have a Majestas Domini with the Pantocrator, where here we have the image of God Almighty, and only the image of one of the evangelists, this case Lucas, survives. The rest, they have disappeared. Just below the image of God Almighty, there is an image of the Sede Sapientae, or the Virgin, an image of a Romanesque Virgin. That was probably the center of the different praise in this church. By the chancel, in the wall of the chancel, we have a very interesting scene of the crucifixion. I'm not getting into the iconography of this scene. It's very lost, as you can see over here. This is a reconstruction that I did with other mural painting. But here is very interesting to note all the background. With all this greenish color that originally was blue. This is azurite. And what happens with azurite when it's not stable, it degrades into malachite. So it turns from this deep blue into this greenish color. So that's why all the background is green, but originally it was of this deep blue. Well, below this scene of the crucifixion, there were scenes of the resurrection of the dead. And in the south side of the chancel, we start seeing different scenes, the three different scenes of the cycle of hell. It goes from top to the bottom, and in the first level, we have an angel, Gabriel, pushing the group of the condemned into the hell itself, into Lucifer, where you can read over here the name Lucifer. No, it's very similar to other wall paintings and also to other images that are in Navarre. But anyway, has to be noted that this cycle of hell in Aristine, it's a very complete and detailed one. Even if, as you can see, all the figures, black figures over here, they were originally painted in white lit, but this white lit, as the azurite, it turned into black. So the second level of the paintings shows this group of condemned entering hell through the mouth of the Leviathan. So it's just over here, another wall painting that is in much better state. Over here, there will be the Leviathan, and the group of condemned, they're entering to this Leviathan. And finally, in the third level, there is this representation of a generic punishment where all the different condemned and souls, they are punished by different demons in this cauldron of hell. Here you can see the scene and in Aristine, and over here with a different filter to note the figures. And this is the sculpture, the Gothic sculpture of the Cathedral of Pamplona, of the entrance of the Cathedral of Pamplona, the Portada de Juicio, where we have a very similar scenes, no? Different demons punishing different sinners in these big cauldrons for all eternity. in contrast with these hellish scenes in the other wall, the hellish scenes that were painted in the south wall, so these ones in the north wall, we have a cycle of an hagiography. So we have narrated with these different scenes and with these different paintings the life of the father of the Virgin, Joachim. And also we have an interesting funerary procession painted in the inner side of the triumphal arch, which they depict these interesting angels with crosses that they are going into the image of God that I first mentioned. No, this is very similar to other funerary scenes painted also in Navarre. And it has to be noted that these angels, they are just above, on top of the tombs of the sepulchres of, for example, of these noble families, and probably on top of the sepulchre of the consort of the king. And finally, in the exterior triumphal arch, there is this mysterious birded face, no, that makes the whole paintings of Aristine even more mysterious. This kind of agreement. So, going back to this narrative of between heaven and hell, I'm basing into a poem of the 15th century by a famous French poet, François Villon, where he narrates how a parish church is painted between this heaven and hell, no? Where there is in one wall, the paradise is painted in one wall, and on the other side, a hell, an enfer, where the condemned, where the sinners, they boil. And here it's important to note this word boil, no? Because it represents this cauldron, and how the only way of salvation is to pray to the Virgin Mary, to the goddess, literally here. Of course, the influence of the important and very well-known doorway of Tudela that I mentioned before, the Portada del Juicio, that was originally painted with these colors, red backgrounds with hellish scenes and blue backgrounds with saints and angels. I think it's pretty clear in this church of Aristine, even if there is a century of difference between both artworks. And well, finally, thanks to the Medieval Academy of America, we were able to do a reconstruction of how the interior of the Church of Aristine was looked like when it was finished, when the paintings were finished, about around 1375, and how it was used by this noble family to bury these family members in wooden coffins into the just below the wall paintings. And well, that will be all. I think was a little bit long, but anyway.
Oh, that's all, Eneko. Thanks so much. I think that's incredible that you've been able to look at these paintings from so many different angles and draw out so many kind of fascinating details from that. So thank you very much for sharing that with us. I wanted to dive in for the first part of the Q&A about the issue of strappo and the way that so many of these kind of mural paintings have kind of been detached. And I'm interested. I know that you mentioned that one of the key issues is that they get sort of literally taken out of the context that they're meant to be viewed in. But I was wondering if you could perhaps expand on that a bit more. What do you think are the challenges for researchers looking at these wall paintings when they're kind of stripped out from the context that they're meant to be seen in?
Well, there are huge challenges, Peter. Yeah, it's a very good question, no? Because many art historians, they research these paintings as original from the Middle Ages, and obviously they are, when they are moved into a museum, the scenario, the context changes completely, but in the 20th century, these paintings were heavily restored, some of them. And of course, these are not, after that restoration, they are not paintings from the Middle Ages. They are paintings originally from the Middle Ages, but transformed into the 20th century. So that raises a lot of questions for the art historians. Until, I mean, where is the level of restoration? I mean, I show some pictures, no, of the, for example, over here. Yeah, here. So the painting in the left is the one in the museum, and of course, we can see how much it changes from the original. So that's the problem. I mean, where did the restorer get this inspiration to paint the pupils over here in this way? The eyelids, I mean, I said in Spanish, the eyelids over here, they're different to these ones. So what is the level of restoration in this case, in this particular painting, which is the main painting of this period, the wall painting from the refectory of the Cathedral of Pamplona? So it's neat, a new approach to all these paintings. Yeah, completely.
I can well imagine. I think especially there's the issue of the restoration, and I guess as well the fact as well that there's another kind of dimension to these paintings, like when they're actually seen like in the specific kind of walls and areas that they were meant to be viewed in as well.
Of course, that's another problem of the wall paintings. No, they are completely decontextualized and placed into canvases and frames in the museum.
Yeah,
Mhm.
definitely. Definitely. That being said, I think one thing that I was really impressed by looking at that were some of these digital reconstructions that yourself and your colleagues have been able to do. And I guess just for my own curiosity, how do you kind of go about digitally reconstructing some of these scenes?
Well, in the one of San Salvador de Calle Pienso, that it was the first that I did. This one over here, I basically I took very good quality, high quality photos of the wall painting of the paintings in the museum, and then I was able to climb a scaffolding that was placed for the restoration of these wall paintings on that remained in the church. So that's why I get like close and good quality images of the wall paintings on the top. And finally, I placed them into this very homemade Photoshop now and layer where I placed each wall painting in the original place now. So it was like I like to say it was like this medieval puzzle.
Yeah, just kind of fitting all of the kind of
Yeah,
different
all
paintings
the
together.
different pieces into the apps. Yeah, yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Mhm.
And I think that that's brilliant because it does at least give like some idea of what it would have looked like. And I think that that's sort of, the power of kind of digital tools when they're able to be used in that kind of sense.
Of course. It's a start. It's a start. But another approach is this one, which is not reconstructing the paintings, only the paintings, but the ambient, the feeling that these paintings and the lighting also created. And this illustration was done by a professional illustrator, and well, she Maya Torres, and she depicted, no, very well this feeling with the original lighting, that there was only one window in the church, in this dark Romanesque church, and how originally the paintings, they should shine, no, with the candles, under the candles. So it should be a really special and very mysterious, I imagine it like that, space.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's again, it's absolutely fantastic because that really gives an idea of like as you say, both the atmosphere and the kind of background that these kind of funeral processes would have taken place in.
Mhm. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Mhm.
And that's brilliant stuff. And I guess sort of moving on then to the mural paintings themselves. One thing that really intrigued me was it seems like that in the 14th century, Navarre was really going through the ringer. I think, just about kind of every horseman of the apocalypse is kind of mentioned at some point. So you've got war, plague, like currency being destroyed, like all sorts of war things are going on. And yet there's this incredible outpouring of artistic talent. And I'm quite interested to know sort of I know that they were mainly sort of aristocratic commissions by the looks of things.
Mhm.
But where did they get kind of the wealth of that, especially when they were bringing in these sort of brilliant pigments like the azurites and the lapis lazuli?
Yeah, it was not aristocracy, but more like a lower nobility. There were
Mhm,
local landlords, especially like
mhm,
thinking on a feudal society, completely feudal society. Local landlords that they get a, I mean the currency, the money to pay for. This is my guess, to pay all these painters from Pamplona because they were hired from the different wars and also by the king, and also they were hired for the local administration of the kingdom. So
mhm,
they get a salary. They get like a modern salary. I mean, each year they were paid twice, so they get a stable income, and that's my guess on why they're related to and why there are these heraldic emblems in these parish churches, because the only ones
mhm,
capable to pay for these wall paintings in this time of crisis, they were the local nobility, who the local rich people, who in a time of crisis they get advantages.
mhm. Yeah, definitely. And it's interesting, sort of, how in sort of, other parts of the world, like when there seems to be this kind of breakdown in central authority, you see these kind of proliferations of different art centers. And it's fascinating the way it's kind of replicated in Navarre, like despite all of these absolutely horrific things that are kind of going on the side.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think wall painting here was used. Maybe the answer why there are so many wall paintings, it's not only economic but also spiritual. I mean, the answer back to all this instability and all this deep crisis with deep faith and decorating local churches maybe was an answer that they used in the period. No?
Hmm. For sure, for sure. And I'm curious, I know that in many other parts of Europe, there were some artistic changes that came about as a result of the Black Death. So certainly in England, for example, you got the memento mori tombs, where you'd see kind of, like the figure above and then like these kind of emaciated corpses below. And I'm curious, like, does that sort of, maybe not that specifically, but are there any kind of indications that the plague may have influenced the kind of ideas and images that were presented in some of these mural paintings?
That's a very good question, Peter. Yeah, thank you. There are actually, I didn't bring them into the presentation, it's a pity, but there are actually two wall paintings that they represent the myth, the story, the legend of the encounter of the three living and the three dead.
Hmm.
And in Spain, there are only five wall paintings in all Spain from the 14th century, I mean, depicting
Hmm.
this scene from all, not only wall paintings, sorry, from all the arts. No? One of them is located better in this map. One of them is located here in Hue and the other one in Ekay. Well, anyway, they depict this story where the three living young nobles, like they are riding horses, very fashionable, very rich, they encounter with their future representation of the dead. And those wall paintings are the coins. They are painted in the 1350s, 1360s. So most probably yes, they were painted because of the plague. Uh, But besides those wall paintings, it has to be noted that, for example, the Memento Moris and the Dance of the Dead, those iconographies were created in the 15th century when these waves of the Black Plague continued, because the
Mm,
Black Plague didn't stop in 1348. It continued all over Europe, and it created this worry about death and this new perspective of life, no?
hmm
And by the end of the Middle Ages. So new artistic representations were created. But the interesting thing is what happened in the very decade after the Black Plague. What they used, what they represented when these iconographical representations of the Dance of the Dead, for example, they were not created, or even some specific saints were transformed into these protectors against the plague, as San Sebastian and San Roch. But in this period in Navarre, there is no San Sebastian, no San Roch. So there is San Christopher. There are a lot of images of San Christopher, and I believe San Christopher was used as a figure of protection against the plague and the death in that period.
hmm
So it's a very interesting question, but hard to answer. But anyway, there are these evidences. Mhm.
I see. Yeah, so I imagine it's quite tricky, but there are kind of there's things there, but it's perhaps sort of tricky to kind of pinpoint like exact things and kind of patterns
Yeah.
and trends.
Mhm. Mhm.
Hmm
But
Yeah,
yeah,
that's
very interesting topic. Yeah, yeah. And it can be compared with, for example, Siena or Florence, where the art of painting also it was changed from the early 14th century, where there was a more humanistic approach to painting, a more
mhm,
happy approach to representations, for example, of on different paintings. I'm thinking on the painter Giotto, of course, but after the second half of the 14th century was more religious, more serious, more yeah, traditional religious images were both and painted rather than artistic innovations. So that's interesting. That maybe talks
mm.
about, the wariness of that period.
Yeah, for sure, for sure. That's really interesting. And one thing I was curious about as well is there any particular reason why heaven is depicted facing north and hell is depicted facing south?
Yes, and it's a very good question because from the perspective of the image of God, heaven is located in the right and hell is located in the left of God. So traditionally, in Christian tradition, left is always related with evil, and right it's always represented with God, with heaven, and with the right way. No, literally. I mean, the word comes from that. I mean, and in Italian or Spanish, there are still this derecha, derecho, siniestro, siniestra. No,
Hmm,
these connotations with this right and left. Mhm.
I see. Good stuff. Yeah, I had a feeling it would be something along those lines. But yeah, good to kind of
Yeah.
understand more about that.
Uh,
Yeah.
uh,
Amazing, yeah, and it seems like there's just so much stuff that we can kind of pull out from this, and I'd be really curious to know, is there anything that you want to kind of do next with this research, or are there any other areas that you'd like to explore in more detail?
Well, there are a lot of churches still to be studied in detail. The thing is not to study it with general perspective, but very much in detail. And there are still many wall paintings that they have been discovered in after the 1990s, in the last 20 years in Navarre and other parts of Spain. There are appearing these wall paintings behind Baroque or Renaissance altarpieces and under whitewash layers that they were not destroyed. So there's still plenty of material to study and a lot of work. So I would like to study some churches in detail, but also to open my research to that part of the 20th century. How was handled all these wall paintings? How were handled? How were used to create museums, and also sold into the art market sometimes. So that's also a very interesting part of this story of the wall paintings, of course.
Brilliant, good stuff. And finally, just to round off the discussion, if our listeners want to learn about this kind of topic in more depth, where are some good places for them to start their reading?
Well, in English, I have my two articles already published, which the first one was published in Comitatus in when this Journal of Medieval and Renaissance Studies, and in the University of California. So it's about a specific case of one church where I studied the wall paintings in detail, and I bring that the patron was a female noble related to the royal family. So it's a very interesting case of female patronage in a Navarrese parish church, after this crisis of 1348. And the other one is the specific and deep study of Edstein, of the church that I presented today. And this is online, open in the Journal of Called Peregrinations, edited by the Canton College in US. So those are, for the moment, the two articles that I have published in English, but they will come more in English. Like, for example, one on the use of azurite in this 14th century. Yeah, so my idea is to keep publishing articles in English in different journals. And in Spanish, there is quite a lot of bibliography and literature on these wall paintings, especially after the 1970s. The traditional dissertation of Carmen Lacarra Lucay, who was the first studying the wall paintings that were moved into the museum. It's a book hard to get maybe in worldwide if you're not in Spain, but it's still very useful. It's it's called Aportación de la pintura mural gótica en Navarra. And besides that, there are fantastic volumes on the study of the Cathedral of Pamplona that I didn't get into detail into the Cathedral of Pamplona here. I only focused in parish churches, but the Cathedral of Pamplona is really fantastic and amazing, and it's has one of the best cloisters, Gothic cloisters of all Europe. So there is a lot of literature in Spanish about that, and I recommend also to get in this 14th century Navarrese artistic world, to get into the Cathedral of Pamplona. Yeah.
Fantastic, good stuff. And I guess to anybody interested, watch this space for any more articles coming out.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Peter. Yeah.
Yeah, also, and thanks to you, Eneko. This has been a fantastic discussion. It's been really interesting to kind of look at these paintings from so many different angles. So thank you so much. It's been such an interesting discussion.
It's great. So happy to share my research with you and with your channel. Yeah.
Not at all. Thank you. And thanks very much to all of our listeners as well. We hope you've enjoyed it, and we hope that you'll join us for the next episode. Take care and goodbye.